The closet. The day was ordinary. After dinner, Peppa and George went up to their room as usual. George quickly fell asleep, snuggling his plush dinosaur, while Peppa played for a little longer, scattering her toys across the floor. The nightlight cast a soft glow over the room. The moon shone outside the window. Everything was peaceful. Before going to bed, Peppa decided to tidy up. She gathered her toys and opened the closet to put them away. The darkness inside seemed a little deeper than usual, as if the shelves extended further than she remembered. She placed her plush teddy bear inside, and at that moment something grabbed her hand. A sudden yank, and Peppa disappeared into the closet. At first, there was complete silence. Then she felt herself falling. Her body sank into something soft, like thick, invisible fog. But as soon as she tried to move, the space around her felt solid. She stood up. Absolute darkness. No closet, no room, no light. Peppa called for Mummy. Her voice was swallowed by endless emptiness. She took a step forward. The floor beneath her was cold. But was this her room? Her closet? She kept walking. Time passed. Minutes? Hours? She had no idea. The darkness never changed, never shifted. Only silence remained. But soon the silence was broken. Somewhere behind her, a faint sound echoed, like someone else had just taken a step. Peppa froze. A step, another. But when she turned around, there was only nothing. Something was here. She could feel it. It never moved when she looked. She ran. Light. Suddenly, a dim glow flickered ahead. Distant. Weak. Peppa sprinted toward it, her heart pounding. The darkness around her tightened, closing in. But she didn't stop. In the next moment, she tumbled back into her room. Peppa lay on the floor in front of the open closet. Everything was in its place. George was asleep. The nightlight glowed softly. The moon shone outside. She breathed heavily. Was it just a dream? But something felt wrong. She stood up. Her movements felt strange, as if her body didn't fully obey her. Slowly, she turned toward George's bed. He was sleeping, unaware of anything. Peppa smiled, but it was not her smile.
Peppa Pig The Rain. The rain began on Monday. Fine, cold rain. It tapped against the windows, ran down the glass, and never stopped. At first, everything seemed normal. Daddy Pig joked that it was perfect tea weather. Mummy put their boots by the door. Peppa drew at the table, listening to the drops on the roof. But by Friday, the sky had turned completely black. Not gray, black, like spilled ink. And the rain grew heavier. The road outside disappeared underwater. Cars stood still. The neighbors' windows stayed dark. Curtains drawn. Parked cars fogged from the inside. "Why isn't anyone coming outside?" asked Peppa. "Everyone's home," said Mummy. "Everyone's waiting for the rain to stop." But her voice wasn't certain. No more post arrived. The lights in nearby houses stayed off. The TV only showed static, and in the flicker, a silhouette standing in the mist. Peppa first saw him on Saturday evening, outside, at the edge of their yard. He stood there, almost vanishing in the rain, tall, silent, a shape made of shadow and water. Peppa blinked, and he was gone. The next night, he returned, closer this time, by the tree near the house. His face was hidden, only a hood, only water. He didn't move, didn't wave, didn't speak, just stood there. "Mummy, someone's out there," said Peppa. Mummy glanced at the window and replied too quickly. "It's just the rain, Peppa." On the third day, Daddy stopped coming down. He sat in his chair upstairs, staring out the window. When Peppa approached, he didn't turn. His shoulders were damp. "Are you wet?" she asked. Daddy didn't reply. There was a puddle beneath his chair, even though the room was dry. On the fourth evening, the guest stepped closer, right under the window. He stood, arms at his sides. Water dripped from him in steady streams. He didn't knock, didn't call, just stood and looked inside. Peppa yanked the curtain shut, quick, tight, but she could still feel his eyes, through the fabric. On the fifth day, Mummy barely moved. She sat at the stove but didn't cook. Her clothes were damp and water pooled under the sink, coming from somewhere inside the walls. That night, Peppa woke to the sound of dripping, but it wasn't rain outside. It was water in the house, drops falling from the ceiling onto the rug, drips leaking from the unplugged TV, doors swollen, soaked. On the sixth day, Daddy disappeared. Only his soggy newspaper remained in the chair, letters blurred like ink left in the rain. In the bathroom mirror there were prints, wet hoof prints, but not theirs. That night the figure tapped on the window just once, softly. A palm-shaped stain remained on the glass, wet, the fingers too long. Peppa backed away. By the seventh night, Mummy was gone too. Only her teacup remained, filled with rainwater. Peppa sat on the floor with George. They held each other's hooves tightly. George stared at the ceiling. He didn't blink anymore, and outside, he stood, the guest, now closer, his face still hidden, but a smile appeared in the raindrops on the glass. Peppa closed her eyes. A whisper came, soft like rainfall, but inside her head. "I'm already here. You let me in." By morning, the house was empty. Outside, no one walked the streets. The sky was still black, and in the window sat a small plush figure, pink, with button eyes. It stared out at the rainy, hollow world, and the rain never stopped. Peppa Pig, too many Peppas. One morning, Peppa woke up and saw herself exactly the same, standing in the corner of her room, just watching unblinking. Same pink skin, same red dress, same bow, but the eyes slightly darker, like dusty buttons. For a second, Peppa thought it was a mirror, but there was no mirror there. The second, Peppa blinked and calmly walked downstairs as if everything was normal. In the kitchen, everything seemed fine. Mummy was setting the table. Daddy was reading the newspaper. George was playing with his toy. "Good morning, Peppas," Mummy said. Peppas, plural. No one seemed surprised. No one asked questions. Two Peppas sat at the table. They ate the same way, chewed in sync, drank with the same tilt of the head, except one of them was staring at the other, constantly, without blinking. The next day, Peppa woke up, and now there were three. One stood by the window, another lay in her bed. The real one had woken up on the floor, wrapped in a blanket. Now no one could tell who had been first, and no one asked. At breakfast, the three Peppas sat together. One ate, one smiled silently. One just sat with her eyes closed and mouth wide open. Every morning a new one appeared, always quiet, always suddenly. They didn't speak, they just watched. Each one stared, at the others, at the real one, waiting. By day 5, there were 5 Peppas, lined up on the stairs. One stood ankle deep in the bathtub. The mirror was covered in prints, tiny hoof prints. Silently, at night, soft sounds came from the hallway, like someone crawling and repeating a name. Peppa, Peppa, Peppa. The real Peppa started hiding. She didn't sleep in the bed anymore. Ate at night when the others weren't watching, erased her name from her notebooks, tried to make sure she was still herself, but the mirror more and more often showed someone else. One day she tried to run, opened the front door, and another Peppa was already standing there, staring, smiling, but she had no eyes, just black hollows. A piece of fabric hung from her mouth like a broken toy. Peppa stepped back. The door shut on its own. Mummy didn't say new things anymore, only the same phrases on repeat. "Everything is fine, Peppa. Everything is fine, Peppa. Everything is fine, Peppa." Daddy sat in his chair, patting one of them on the head, but Peppa knew. He didn't know which one. George played with 4 Peppas at once, each holding a toy, all saying, "We love you, George. We love you, George," he cried. One morning Peppa woke up and didn't recognize anyone. The room was filled with herself. They sat on the floor, on shelves, under the bed. Some faceless, some soundless, some stared directly at her. She tried to scream but heard instead, "I'm the real one. No, I'm the real one. Me, me, me," all at once. That night the lights never turned on. Peppa looked into the mirror one last time, looked at herself, and didn't recognize the face. In the reflection there were 9 Peppas, but none of them blinked. The next day the house was quiet. From outside everything seemed normal. The family at breakfast, silence, perfect order, and Peppa sat at the table, now in every room, and no one asked which one was real anymore, because the real one was gone. Peppa Pig The Wardrobe. It started with a sound, a small one, A gentle creak, like someone moving in the dark. Peppa woke up in the middle of the night. The room was dark, only a faint glow of moonlight spilled through the curtains. She heard it again. Creak, rustle, very soft. Not the wind, not George. She looked at the wardrobe. It was closed, but it felt like someone was standing behind the door, listening. In the morning, she almost forgot. Almost. Until George couldn't find his toy dinosaur. He'd left it by the bed, he was sure. Now it was gone. Peppa looked under the bed, in the toy box behind the curtains. Nothing. She opened the wardrobe. When she pulled the handle, she felt a strange resistance, like something was gently holding it from the inside. And when it opened, it was darker than usual, and deeper. That night, Peppa woke up again, this time to a knock. Software. Hollow. Like something was tapping from inside the door. She didn't go near it. She lay awake until morning, unblinking. The next day, her socks were missing. Then, her notebook. Then, George's pillow. Something disappeared every morning. Nobody noticed. Her parents said, "You probably misplaced it." But Peppa knew. The wardrobe was taking them. She started tying the doors shut with string each night. Knots tight and careful. Each morning, the string was undone, the door opened just a little. On the fourth night, George began whispering strange things in his sleep, words, phrases. "He knows I'm here. He promised to show me the toys, and he said you're coming too." During the day, George was quiet. He stared at the floor, sometimes straight at the wardrobe. On the fifth night, Peppa woke to silence, complete heavy silence. She looked toward George's bed, empty. His blanket was folded. On the pillow, a drawing in chalk, a shadowy figure standing inside the wardrobe. On the floor, small hoof-shaped prints leading into the dark. The door stood wide open. Mummy said George had gone to visit his aunt. Daddy smiled, but his eyes were distant. Peppa tried to explain. No one listened. Even at school, no one remembered George. Susie said, "You never had a brother, Peppa. You must be imagining things." She came home, sat on the floor, and stared at the wardrobe for hours. Inside, silence. But if you listened long enough, you could hear breathing, slow, sliding. On the final night, Peppa blocked the door with a chair, wrapped tape around the handles, slipped a note under her pillow. "If I'm gone, he took me too." She woke up to a rustling sound. The chair was knocked over, tape torn, the wardrobe open, very wide. Something cold spilled out of it, and two small hands, pink, familiar, copied from her own. In the morning, the room was empty. One bed, one chair, one open wardrobe, no toys, no footprints, no Peppa. On the wall above the bed, a message scratched into the paint. "Now they are mine." Peppa Pig, the Tooth Fairy. One morning, Peppa noticed one of her teeth was loose. She showed it to Mummy Pig, who nodded. Nothing unusual, just a baby tooth. It would fall out soon. Peppa was excited. When a tooth falls out, you can place it under your pillow, and in the night, the Tooth Fairy comes. All day, Peppa played with the tooth, wiggling it back and forth. By evening, it finally came out. She wrapped it gently in tissue, placed it under her pillow, and went to bed smiling. The night was quiet at first. In the middle of the night, Peppa woke up. Her room was dark, but not completely. In the corner, a strange glow shimmered, not yellow, not white, a greenish silver light. Something was standing by the door. A figure, tall, too tall, bent over, movements like sliding across the floor. As it came closer, Peppa shut her eyes tight, but even through her eyelids she felt it, something reaching under her pillow. It lasted just a moment, but it felt like she was lying there for hours. When she woke up in the morning, the tooth was gone. Under her pillow was a small, rusty key. The next day, another tooth began to loosen. It fell out without pain, by itself, then another and another. No one seemed to notice. Mummy Pig said it was normal, but other children only lost one tooth. Peppa had already lost 7 in 2 days. Each night under the pillow, a new item appeared, a key, a coin with unreadable numbers, a piece of bone, a shard of mirror scratched in the center. Peppa stopped speaking. She didn't smile anymore. She didn't want to eat. Each night she heard steps, floorboards creaked, cold wind came from the closet, though the window was shut. On the 6th night she woke up and couldn't close her mouth. All her teeth were gone. Even the back ones. There was something sitting at the edge of the bed, closer than before. Peppa could see its face now, but it wasn't a face, just skin stretched over something. No eyes, no mouth. On its fingers, a string of teeth tied like beads. The thing leaned forward. Peppa felt the cold and the smell of metal. She tried to scream, but no sound came. In the morning, the bed was empty. Her parents thought Peppa had gone to the garden, but she wasn't there, and not anywhere in the house. On her pillow was a note, scratched into the fabric using enamel. Thank you. Peppa Pig, The Extra Rooms. One morning, Peppa woke up and went downstairs. Halfway to the kitchen, she stopped. There was a door in the hallway, where there had always been just a plain wall, where she had run past hundreds of times, now hung an old wooden door, cracked and peeling. The handle gleamed with dull metal, and there was a smell, dampness, and something else, something stale. "Mummy, Daddy," Peppa asked at breakfast, "where did that door come from?" Mummy calmly poured tea and said, "It's always been there, Peppa." Daddy didn't even lift his eyes from the newspaper. No one said anything more. After breakfast, Peppa and George carefully approached the door. Peppa placed her hoof on the cold handle and pushed. Behind the door was a room, empty, grey. The walls were cracked, the floor thick with dust. The air was heavy and damp, smelling like wet cloth. In the corner of the room lay an old battered ball. Peppa grabbed George's hoof and closed the door. The next day, another door appeared. On the landing, where a picture of flowers had always hung, the picture was gone. In its place stood a tall, narrow door covered in scratches. The room behind it was different again, a long corridor stretching into darkness. On the walls hung paintings, but the faces were blurred, as if they had melted in the rain. When Peppa called out, "Who's there?" only an echo answered, but it was not her voice. It was as if someone else had repeated her words, twisted and wrong. Every day new doors appeared, sometimes tiny ones, as if for very small creatures, sometimes huge, twice as tall as Daddy Pig. Once they even found a door right in the floor. When Peppa opened it, a wave of cold, damp basement air hit her face. Old rooms began to disappear. One day Peppa went to find the bathroom, and behind the door was a dusty, windowless hall. Somewhere in the corner sat her old, forgotten potty. The house was changing. The walls seemed to breathe. The ceilings creaked. And in some of the new rooms, something moved in the shadows, very slowly, very quietly. But whenever Peppa looked closely, everything froze. When she asked Mummy, "Why is everything changing?" Mummy just smiled. "We're growing, Peppa." But her smile was too wide, and her eyes looked right through Peppa. Sometimes Peppa heard voices behind the new doors, thin, childlike. Peppa, George, but they weren't her friends. The way the name sounded was all wrong. On the 6th day, Peppa tried to open the front door, but outside there was no garden, no sunlight, only a dark, endless hallway, door after door after door, and in each room, behind the thin walls, something whispered. "We're alone here," George whispered. Peppa hugged him tighter. Suddenly, one of the doors creaked open just a crack. Something grey peeked out and quickly disappeared again. On the 7th day, their bedroom vanished. They woke up in a new room. The walls were unfamiliar, the ceiling too low. The windows showed not the street but thick, swirling grey fog. On the wall hung an old family photo, but instead of faces, only blank white patches. That evening they saw their parents. Mummy and Daddy stood in one of the new rooms, but their faces were different, as if someone had tried to recreate them from memory and got it wrong. Their voices sounded strange. "Welcome home." Since then, the Pig family's house disappeared from all maps. No one could find it anymore.